let's start then. Okay, so, Okay, so my name is Łukasz Wojtyga. I'm representing Center for Strategic Studies of Warsaw Enterprise Institute from Poland. Warsaw Enterprise Institute is an independent think tank dedicated to economic freedom, civil liberty, support for clear and transparent legal system. I would like very warm welcome to all of you at our first joint debate organized by Warsaw Enterprise Institute from Poland and Institute of Economic Research and Policy Consulting from Kiev, Ukraine. Especially, I would like to express my special gratitude to Weronika Mowczan for initiative for this meeting and inviting us to this debate. A full-scale Russian invasion in February 2022 accelerated Ukraine's efforts to join the European Union. The association agreement, which came into the force in political part in 2014 and economic part in 2016, implementing deep and comprehensive free trade area, formed the basis for Ukraine's preparation for access. In June last year, Ukraine was granted the candidate status to European Union. As agriculture and especially plant production account for about 2/3 of Ukrainian export to EU countries or through European countries to third countries outside Europe, we would like to start our discussion on possibilities and status of Ukraine's integration into EU from the perspective of agriculture and food production. I would like to welcome our panelists representing different institutions and different points of view, both from Ukraine and from Poland. First of all, Weronika Mowczan, Research Director, Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting from Ukraine. Professor Oleg Niwiewski, Dean of Postgraduate Studies in Economics, Kiev School of Economics. Oleksandra Vramienko, Head of European Integration Committee, Ukrainian Agro-Business Club. Marcin Nowacki, Vice President, Union of Entrepreneurs and Employers from Poland. Dr. Roman Gurbiel, expert of the Center for Analysis of Jagiellonian Club. And Józef Lang, Director of Warsaw Enterprise Institute Office in Kiev from Poland. Our discussion is organized within the framework of the project Ukraine's Integration to EU Internal Market, Progress under Association Agreement and the New Opportunities, implemented by Institute of Economic Research and Policy Consulting with financial support from International Renaissance Foundation, Ukraine. That's why I would like to ask Dmytro Shulga, the European Program Director of International Renaissance Foundation, the generous donor for this program, for some introductory remarks. Please, Dmytro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. This is really a pleasure, and it's really very important that there is interest from the Polish side to discuss this important topic right now. We understand that basically European Union integration of Ukraine is really a strategic course of our country, and a lot of debates is going on now on the political side of it, the accession process, the opening of the accession negotiations talk, hopefully to be expected in the end of this year, where we see that Poland is clearly advocating together with Ukraine for as fast as possible going forward with finding political will from the EU to do that. While on the other side, in the economic sphere, we have seen that there sparked some sort of huge debate about understanding what does it mean for countries like Poland and for other members of the European Union, integration of Ukraine into the single market, which is happening already now, and future full-scale integration to the EU of such a country like Ukraine, which is not only a receiver of support, which is also considerable, of course, and probably will be considerable receiver in the future, but also a big producer, large producer, especially in the field of agriculture, and understanding that we have here like some sort of common issues, and very important to understand where between Ukraine and Poland in the framework of the EU Union and the framework of the common agricultural policy, common policy of the EU in general, we can maximize our joint points of joint interests and minimize the points of competition and disagreement. So this is really strategic question for us, I think, in bilateral relations, but also in broader perspective, looking at the EU and what sort of reform of Ukraine is happening with the EU accession, but also hoping that European Union will be also more, let's say, so Central Eastern European perspective will be more reflected in it after Ukraine is joining. And here, really, Ukraine-Polish understanding is really key. And that's why this very important conversation with really experts looking at the real structure and real issues which we have now is very important. I hope we will have a productive debate, which will be very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dmytro. Well, it's very important that you mentioned that the decision for access of Ukraine to the European Union, it's not only the decision came from the economical point of view, but first of all, it would be the political decision of the countries right now in European Union. Okay, as a pretext for this meeting was fifth updated edition of a report of integration within the association implementation dynamics of EU-Ukraine agreement. I would like to ask Veronika to take a floor and present the most important finding of this report. As I mentioned, the report was just published by Institute of Economic Research and Policy Consulting. Veronika.
Łukasz, thank you very much. Let me share the screen and try to make it with this. First of all, I want to thank Łukasz and the Warsaw Enterprise Institute for agreeing to have these series of debates based on our report, because it's very important, and Łukasz and Dmytro already highlighted that the joint debate, the mutual understanding, what will mean the Ukraine's future accession for Ukraine itself, but especially for EU member states, and how to ensure that we strengthen each other and mitigate potential crisis is of high importance. And we chose agriculture as food market as a first stage for these extremely important series of debates. As Łukasz already said, the pretext for this meeting and the push was the preparation of report called Integration Within the Association, and I added now and beyond. That was generously funded by the International Renaissance Foundation within the project Ukraine's integration into the EU internal market. It was the fifth study. It's a fifth version. Basically, before June 2022, association agreement was considered to be the key element for Ukraine's EU integration. Before the full-scale Russian aggression, frankly, it was almost unimaginable that EU would agree for enlargement in the near future, despite the fact that for Ukraine, that was a strategic target for years. But as it was a strategic target for Ukraine, with no explicit consent on the EU, Ukraine was searching for various forms of integration de facto if it would not be possible formally as a member. And that's why the International Renaissance Foundation and Dmytro Shulga, they launched a monitoring and analysis of the progress of association agreement implementation with a special focus on spheres, allowing in-depth accession. And we are very proud to be a part of this process and launching the fifth and previously the fourth edition of this study. As now Ukraine is a candidate country, the analysis of sectoral integration was complemented now with also analysis how sufficient the association agreement for potential future accession talks. Basically, if we are talking about the association agreement and its economic component, it's in two key titles, Title Trade and Trade-Related Matters, and it's Title 4 and Title 5, Economic and Sectoral Cooperation. And very tentatively, these all commitments of Ukraine and EU can be split in three large areas. This is direct action arrangements, basically liberalizing market access. The countries agreed on duties, on TRQs, on tariff rate quotas, on entry prices if they're never relevant. They agreed on safeguards, on commitment not to impose additional barriers. All that is quite straightforward, although Ukraine and EU already have arbitrage. Ukraine imposed some moratorium on wood, and also EU has been taken unilateral steps supporting Ukraine in introducing autonomous trade measures in addition to the baseline commitments. But still, it's more or less clear what is done and how it's done. Then we have two more sectors. This is a sectoral integration arrangements given if-then principle. It's very close to the accession talks, but unlike accession talks, we have a clear goal in a reachable future, more or less forecastable future. That is, Ukraine has to fulfill commitments to harmonize, align legislation, to establish proper institutional framework, and then it will be gained, like a recognition of equivalence for some specific sectors. And there are arrangements that are designed for a level playing field. That is to ensure that we are competing on equal footing, more or less. These arrangements in the association agreement do not lead to any additional openings or additional penalties if not implemented. But these arrangements are crucial for accession talks because they also establish some baseline rules already aligned with EU for another chapters of accession. However, our focus was on the sectoral integration, that is on arrangements based on if-then principle. And we identified 15 spheres of such integration. Only few of them already implemented. Actually, we are quite behind the deadlines established in the association agreement, and it's a fault of both parties, partially Ukraine. It's not aligning as fast as was expected, but also partly the EU because it was not checking the alignment as fast as expected. So we are still in the process, but we have some positive things. In food safety, for example, we have first recognition of equivalence for cereal seeds. We have in customs, Ukraine joint common transit system. In aviation, it's a common aviation area arrangement agreement was signed. We have quite in-depth integration for natural gas and for electricity. But as we today discuss food and agriculture markets, I want to focus a bit more on agro-food, product safety, what is committed in the association agreement, and also how EU assesses it. And I also added a bit, in addition to the association agreement, in addition to food safety that I analyzed in the report, I added several other areas which are relevant for agriculture and food market. Basically, if we look in the chapters of the accession talks and the association agreement, there are four major entries where we have to think about agriculture and food market. It's not one split, one buck. We are talking about market access. That is In association agreement, it envisages duty-free trade with some exemptions. It is a TRQs. It's on EU side, it's only 36 agriculture and food categories, and on Ukrainian side, it's a 3 food categories. But EU has also entry prices, and Ukraine actually has non-zero duties for some agriculture as in the end of association agreement. Basically, that is almost completed. The countries almost achieved where they wanted. But we also have autonomous trade measures that were introduced in May 22 to support Ukraine in a crisis caused by full-scale Russian war of aggression. And that actually stimulated trade with the EU. We did an analysis, and it showed that actually last year, 22, despite the war, Ukraine exports to EU increased. And this increase was mainly driven by the growth of exports in these products that previously were under TRQs. So basically that was the push that was very important. Then food safety, the major issue that we considered in the report. It is very comprehensive in terms of commitments, much more comprehensive than any other part of the association agreement. The list of EU acquis, list of EU legal acts that Ukraine committed to align is 242, and that is placed in a special comprehensive strategy for SPS harmonization that was adopted in addition to the acquis. Ukraine submitted this strategy in a half year after the completion of the conclusion of the agreement. That in this part, the enactment happened 2016, as Lukasz highlighted, but the strategy was adopted only in 2019. There was some technical issues before it was quote. Still, what is the main goal according to association agreement? It's a recognition of equivalence for all foods product sectors relevant for agriculture. There was no set that we have certain areas we can get recognition equivalence. It could be all. According to Ukrainian official assessment published in the pools of the agreement, Ukraine as of now completed 78% of legal tasks. And it was a high acceleration in 2023. For example, as of January, it was only 68%. So the country is adopting the legislation. However, so far, the recognition of equivalence, which is like a mutual process, it has only for cereal seeds, as I said, and it happened already in 2020. Ukraine using also this verification of individual establishments for animal products and trading as usual with other products. In agriculture and rural development, if the food safety, we have almost complete alignment. Actually, it's quite sufficient for the talks. In agriculture and rural development, the aim is cooperation in promoting agriculture and rural development. It's no integration aim, no liberalization aim. That's why we did not analyze it in the report, because it's more like level playing field rather than integration component, which is clear because the common agricultural policy, you cannot join it if you are not a member of the EU. And it's no sense to implement it if you are not a member of the EU. Still, the legal harmonization was about quality policy, organic farming, GMOs, and biodiversity and marketing standards for both plants and animal products. Ukraine has progressed in legal approximation. About 2/3 of tasks are officially reported as complete. And another sector which is important for agriculture is the IPR protection, intellectual property rights protection. Therefore, agriculture and food, especially important, is the protection of geographical indications, which is a big deal for the EU. Ukraine has formally completed all the tasks, and formally protects all GIs, but it's not sufficient for like accessions, far not sufficient. If we are talking about how EU sees what Ukraine did, I'm relying on the analytical report published in February 23, but basically it's the assessment based on what Ukraine reported answering the questionnaire. We see that there is quite a significant gap in readiness, in preparedness. For food safety, the European Commission says it's moderately prepared, and for agriculture, rural development, and for IPRs, it's early stages of preparation. Food safety. European Commission also recognizes it's a comprehensive legal commitment of Ukraine in this sphere, and according to its assessment, as of June 2022, so a year ago, Ukraine has already fully aligned 77 legal acts. It's about 35% of what EU considers important for this chapter, and 32%, the alignment has been ongoing. Definitely the further steps, it's alignment and institutional development, but in principle, the country is moving fast. In other two sectors, still a lot remains to be done. In terms of especially huge tasks are about the common agricultural policy and preparation of everything. It's not only about registers, but all administrative system has to be prepared, which is a gigantic task per se, and also the task which is important to be done. Then we are coming to the accession talks, because it's useful only within the EU. With IPR protection, it's easier. It's more focusing on enforcement, although legal alignment also needed, because a lot of assessments are saying that the current association agreement is quite shallow in intellectual right protection. Very quick conclusions. I want to focus on in the report, we have a lot of discussions about the entire sphere, and also a lot of recommendations more like generic, what EU and Ukraine should do to ensure that it's institutionally smooth, the process. But what is important if we take away in this sphere? Food safety. Association agreement gives a quite sufficient basis for accession talks, and Ukraine is progressing quite fast. Here, there's also EU recognizing that Ukraine achieved a lot. For Ukraine, the short-term task is recognition of equivalence, especially for key export products, because it's what can help to smooth the trade. Agriculture and rural development commitments in the association agreement are far not sufficient, which is absolutely reasonable. And the short-term task for Ukraine is to prioritize what we do after what is needed already now, where we can wait till a higher level of accession talks process. In intellectual property rights, is also commitments are not sufficient for the talks, but here it's much more of mutual interest to progress fast and ensure that the IPRs are fully protected, including GIs, because it's a higher value added, and that's what Ukraine will need for reconstruction. That's briefly what I wanted to discuss for this, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Veronica. And right now, let's our discussion begin. Thank you very much for setting up the stage in Ukraine, in the preparedness of Ukraine for European Union. But please, I would like to start with our Ukrainian panelists. To what extent the outbreak of war caused the complete collapse of this plan? What's the current situation in Ukrainian agri-food market resulting from the situation caused by the full-scale Russian aggression. Let's start with Alexandra Avramienko, please.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for hosting discussion. I think it's quite crucial. As of now, as Ukraine is moving forward, the EU and EU needs to be prepared of accepting Ukraine as well. If we talk about the agricultural sector and how the war influenced on it, well, we can go deep into the details, including the numbers, but I would like to speak in general on behalf of the business and describe all the conditions that business was facing since 24th of February 2022. Basically, the most important fact that disturbed all the production facilities and all the all the chains that were working in Ukrainian agriculture were logistics. With the closure of the ports, Ukrainian agricultural value chain that is included basically in global value chain of different products was disrupted, creating extra waves also for the EU market, creating extra problems for the EU. So that the Ukrainian business, especially in agriculture and agricultural sector, was influenced to find new solutions to export massive amounts of products. But also, as you remember, it was the February and the sowing campaign was coming quite soon. So the business was facing two problems at the same time. First of all, we needed.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We can see you. We can see you right now.
Could you hear me?
Yes, right now. Please continue.
Okay, I'm sorry. So the business had to face two problems at the same time. First, the possibility to export all the products, especially in terms of grains. You know, Ukraine is one of the biggest grain suppliers in the world. And our infrastructure that is in Ukrainian seaports is very important to dispatch these products. Since the ports were closed, we got stuck. The producers, traders, exporters, everyone who are included in this chain on the side of Ukraine were stuck and needed help. So we're grateful for the EU side, for the solidarity lanes, for the support we have from also Turkey and United Nations to restore at least some exports through our seaports. Still, this is not enough. This is not even close to be enough compared to all the volumes we had. But I'm not getting deep into the numbers. That's on the one side. On the other side, business faced liquidity problems. With all the support that was provided by the companies to Ukrainian society to help the country fight, to help civilians to survive. This was all, I wouldn't say all, but also on the shoulders of the business producers, of business companies and agricultural producers. So companies also needed to find this opportunity to export, to get some liquidity in order to keep the business running. This was also the constant problem, and it's still right now. Last but not least, unfortunately, the war is still ongoing. The shelling is still ongoing. Today, Kyiv was again attacked during the night and during the day, and this is constant. And this is on the one side, so that some infrastructure is being damaged, and we had the blackouts in Ukraine that also had some influence. But on the other side, we also had the actual fightings, and we have a serious contamination of Ukrainian soil, which also needed to be resolved somehow with the help of our international friends, because Ukraine, again, as we say, is one of the suppliers of the products on the global market. So basically, Ukraine supports the food security in the world. That's on the other side. I think in short, that's what I can say. I also know that maybe Oleg could add some numbers so that we will equal in this position. But if I may, one important thing. During the war, especially we have the martial law, we have limitations on men leaving the country. So we have women also now doing diplomacy and business diplomacy at the same time. We also have huge support from the government, and this is some kind of, I wouldn't say it's new, but this is something that developed quite fast, especially during the war, because now we need more government to speak on behalf of the business, and now government needs to also hear us way better. So this is also some kind of new interesting condition that developed quite greatly during this time.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I would like to have a voice from Professor Oleg Niewiewski on the same question. How the Russian invasion affect the current situation of Ukrainian agriculture? We have some special rules, what Olga mentioned, in European Union as solidarity corridors, but also in Poland, for example, we're affected with Ukrainian grain. It was big crisis, some protests from the farmer sector. So how the Ukraine is dealing right now with Ukrainian agriculture is dealing with a war?
Thanks a lot, Lucas. How much time do I have? How many minutes? How much minutes?
well, let's say 3 minutes and a half.
3 minutes. Okay. So on overall, just to have a bigger picture of the strategies that we have in Ukraine is that we are monitoring that on a regular basis at Kyiv School of Economics, and recent estimates show us that at the moment, more than $140 billion. These are the damages, the overall damages of Ukraine. So the infrastructural damages. I think today's shelling will add on top the costs of damages. And according to the recent World Bank document, where we also contributed, Ukraine will need already more than $400 billion for recovery and reconstruction. And this is twice as much, even 3 times more than the current GDP, so the last year GDP. So definitely this is a huge burden on Ukraine. And we are not talking here about the tragedy of lives, millions of internally displaced people, refugees, almost third population of the country basically is displaced either internally or abroad. When it comes to agriculture, at the moment, unfortunately, a third of agriculture has been ruined completely. So this is basically 30% of the damages is of the total capital is basically the damages, 30%. And the level of economic losses is already equals to about the level of the overall production in 2021. In the monetary terms. So economic losses are really immense. And that's why Alexandra is saying that, the liquidity problems also are immense in Ukraine. And that's not the end, because this year we also expect a lower harvest. There's going to be lower production, and the burden will be accumulating. And I'm telling that because, we all expect lower world market prices, and that's going to be lower domestic prices. So for agriculture, that's going to be even more difficult. It's not like we had after the beginning of the war, where the prices skyrocketed almost by a factor of 2, and almost all farmers in the world, including in Poland, benefited from that immense. Even now, the prices are a bit higher than to the previous time. And of course, we had these huge masses of grain that were needed to be exported somewhere. And luckily, we got a help from the European Union with the solidarity lines. And then, naturally, the grain was going through the Poland and other countries in the European Union. And definitely that had an impact. Although I think that, the arguments from the Poland side are not fair, and lack definitely the empirical evidence in terms of the prices, in terms of the effect on prices, in terms of the effect on stocks, etc., etc. What is also, I think, very interesting is that the figures that we have, they show that Poland needs Ukrainian grain. It needs badly, and and this is not kind of the episode or the phenomena. I mean, it's really economic activities and it's really kind of revealed preferences from our trading partners. And I think that shows that Poland needs Ukraine grain, needs Ukraine crops, and I hope that this cooperation will only develop in the future and with the economic integration of Ukraine into the European Union. Yeah, so that's sort of in a nutshell. I can explore more on the arguments in current discussions in terms of the exports to European Union, but maybe I can leave it for other colleagues to comment. There was a question in the chat. I saw that there was a question on the scale of the mined fields in Ukraine, and at the moment, as far as I know, the most recent estimate on the lands, agricultural lands that need demining is about 2.6 million hectares of land. These are the lands that really require intensive demining. I'm not talking about sort of the technical inspection that I mean, like our authorities mentioned about 30% of Ukraine needs technical inspection, not actually demining, but technical inspection. But again, 2.6 million hectares of land. This is a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Well, we also have information that in general the production export of grains in Ukraine dropped out in more than 50% for now. So, okay, and before the outbreak of the current war, Ukraine was one of the largest food producers in Europe, with aspiration to play a leading role in the world in this area. Agriculture had become Ukrainian first large industry. And but given the Ukrainians' European aspiration, to what extent the European Union is ready to accept Ukraine? What changes should be implemented in the common policy so what Ukraine can participate on equal terms in European projects? So I would like to ask Marcin Nowacki on this question: how is really the European Union ready for Ukraine in food and agriculture industry?
Good afternoon, hi, and thank you for having me here during this debate. I mean, first of all, we need to underline that the decision to open the single market to Ukraine is unprecedented. The decision that took place a year ago was taken by the Council and the European Parliament. It is something special. We were very much in favor from the very beginning. I mean, our organization, but Poland as a country, to do so, and I'm glad it is prolonged for another period. So in a way, this opening is the answer to your question. It is unprecedented, and we may experience, we may see the situation in months, years to come, that basically in number of areas, products, services, we won't ask this question ourselves anymore. I mean, there won't be a need because we simply there will be a feedback from the Europeans, from member states and the citizens that we don't see any troubles. Yes, let's continue that. I think for many sectors that can be the case. We'll see. We still need to be focused and make sure that negotiations are open later this year. We need to use this momentum because there is no coherence on that across member states. Let me be clear on that. I co-chair the EU-Ukraine Civil Society Platform in Brussels, which is a part of the European Economic and Social Committee. I speak a lot to different representatives of member states, and the more west you go, the less, I would say, willingness to open negotiations and to make it to really make its official political process. But the momentum is here. It's a political decision, and I hope all of us, all stakeholders, can push to make it happen later this year. It must be decided by the council, so it's a high-level political decision. So definitely there is a space to integrate much faster than it used to be for other countries, other regions. Of course, for some sectors, for some services, there will be a transition period involved. This is for sure. Once the war is over, there will be a pressure from specific groups across Europe to at least to focus on specifics and limit the presence of Ukrainian products or services. For that, we should be ready, but this is going to be negotiated as a part of the process. But again, I think that the unprecedented decision of opening the single market can really strengthen and make the process much easier, especially if you take into consideration different group of interests and generally the willingness of member states, the EU as a whole, to keep the kind of level playing field amongst the members themselves. That's one. Second, I think there are, from the European perspective and specific member states, lots of synergies, especially in terms of the agri-food sector. Of course, there are tensions and specific interests. There are some sensitive issues. We were critical about the ban on import, but on the other hand, we of course understand politics behind that. We are about to face national election later this year, and as for now, all political parties, all political groups are very much in favor of all the support, involvement, financial, military involvement of Poland to Ukraine. We must make sure that it's going to happen this way, that no extremists will be playing with the wheat export and import to somehow underline difficulties that might be the case for a small group of people. So that's one. Second, we mostly discuss here wheat, and as you know, Poland is actually self-sufficient in terms of meat. Of course, the import was quite limited to the volume we produce and to the volume of Ukrainian production. So it was in a way a peanut, what I call, but still, especially if it's a peanut, there is no way to somehow argue about the import itself. From the very beginning for Ukraine, it was critical to transit grain, especially wheat, via Poland, and that was the will. We've met several times with Minister Mykola Solski and discussed it also with industrial stakeholders in Poland who have different perspective than small farmers, small Polish farmers, because they are very much in favor of the import and openness of both markets. We talk here about synergies in the field of processing. That's another way we can develop our competitive advantage, both for Ukraine and for Poland. But transit of grain is not an easy thing. It's not a regular transit, as we know from other products, that simply the truck comes and goes through. In order to discuss and to really approach that volume that is produced by Ukraine, we need to discuss and use railways. And because of the change of the gauge systems in Ukraine and the EU, including Poland, it requires logistics. So you need to change the platform, you need to store containers, and of course, the transit can be a way to also leave part of the product domestically, and that's another issue to control. Right now, I think we have the system that can make sure that transit is transit and import is import. So, and here is also the space for our businesses to cooperate and develop both in western side part of Ukraine and the eastern part of Poland in terms of logistic facilities, storage facilities. We need to have more terminals dedicated to purely provide the service for grain. So this is where I see options and way to grow together.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Here I see that Professor Niewiewski raised his hand, so please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's like music in the ear, in my ear, you know. And I wonder why sort of processing associations were really silent during this, crisis and discussions on the imports, because that was really kind of lacking in the policy discussion. That were just kind of small farmers associations putting everything forward to stop grain, etc. But what I also would like to to comment on that this is the situation that we have right now. We have lots of corn. I mean, relatively relatively more corn exported to Poland. Wheat not that much, but that means that the livestock sector is benefiting a lot from the export from Ukrainian corn and feed grain in a sense. But what I also sort of observe from the economic literature and empirical evidence is that this policy that is currently in the European Union grain deal with its core strategy from fork to farm, from farm to fork. I mean, this is a limiting factor for agricultural development in the European Union, because there are some model calculations that if this is going to be the case for another 10 years or so, the European Union will turn from net exporter into net importer of grains. So that means the importance of Ukraine as an exporter, for especially in terms of kind of providing a feed for Polish processing sector and livestock sector is even bigger. So so from my perspective, there is no way to it's just kind of more cooperation, more integration with the European Union, and this will become to the benefit of all in this situation. But I think that Ukraine will also become a kind of a game changer in the European Union, because such a big country with such a huge amounts of lands, this is something to, I think, rethink European Union policy also as well. So I also kind of expect lots of kind of policy discussions in terms of the future European agricultural policy. I mean, that's not really will change drastically, I think, the agricultural policy, but I think that's going to be a trigger for more accelerated discussion and for more changes in the European Union towards the more, I would say, liberalized way how agriculture should function in the European Union. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Right now, I will ask Roman Gurbiel for some comments. Especially, you are the author of a report on the current state of Ukrainian agriculture market. So please, some words of comment.
Thank you for inviting me for this discussion. I think that we can.
Is it possible to see you, Roman?
My screen is switched on. Hope you see it.
No, unfortunately, we can only hear you.
Oh, okay. No, I don't know why. I don't know why. Let me. And now? And now it works?
Oh, unfortunately
Okay.
not, just a voice.
Okay, okay. I will try to do it in the meantime. So not to
Okay,
stop,
great,
not to
please.
stop the discussion because it's switched on. So I will solve it in the meantime. There were already several issues mentioned in the discussion, which I would like to also touch to. One, just a few, so the minutes ago was the CAP policy and its so-called restructuring or the change. I think this is a very important issue which will be on the table because as it was properly mentioned, Ukraine is a large and potentially very, very large producer of food. And we have some strategic situation or the changes which may impact the CAP policy. Of course, the first is the impact of the war and the revitalization of the agriculture in Ukraine. And in this case, the CAP is for sure the insufficient instrument to help Ukraine to recover. Maybe the CAP in its current instrumentarium portfolio should be drastically changed just to meet the Ukrainian preferences or the specifics, not to be transferred one-to-one as it is the case of European countries or established European countries as it is today. So this is one point. The second point is that the budget for the CAP is quite limited. So we will also have to take it into account how to solve this problem, because in any shift of this limited budget to Ukraine will, of course, raise protests not only in Poland but also in other countries like Romania, Hungary, primarily these former
and France, especially France.
And also France. Yeah, so this is something which we have to work out in the meantime. Once thinking about the instrumentarium, so this is one. The second element which we have to have in mind is that at the end of the day we will have to compete in some way. And there is both complementarity in our between Poland or the EU and Ukrainian, but also there's a substitution competition. And as far the history is that the Ukraine was the major exporter to the world, and everybody was living with that. But once these corridors were opened to EU, Ukraine has much better access to European market, where probably the agriculture margins will be higher compared to the margins in other parts of the world. This means that it is in critical interest of Ukraine to probably reshift its structure of export to countries where the margins are higher. This, of course, will create the constraint on the countries like Poland and the others, which are dependent on the EU market. Poland is exported to the world, but it's the fraction of the world export is relatively small. So for us, the markets like Germany, like France, where we export high-level, highly processed food are of critical importance. And in the years, once Ukrainian agriculture will recover, we can expect that Ukrainian farmers will invest into the processing. So they will move at the value chain to the much higher processed products. This is, of course, the future because of the war, but we have to have it in mind that at some point of time we will have to compete, and that shall be also somehow solved. So just completing this, what I would like to add also to this first presentation regarding the food safety and the acquis, I think that what is also we have to take into account that the war has destroyed the human potential in Ukraine. And at the end of the day, the accession and the integration has to be led by the people, by the qualified people, which will have the proper knowledge. They have to be properly educated. They have to know languages, etc., etc. And the issue is, if we can pass the law, but do we have the people? Do we have the systems? Do we have real execution capability to deliver? And maybe this is an area where Poland and Ukraine could work out, because we have a lot of Ukrainian highly educated people here in Poland, and maybe Poland could help educate these Polands to lead the agricultural transformation in Ukraine. So that's first my points. Thank you.
Thank you, Roman, very much. Well, you mentioned the issue of food processing, which is really, really important. I hope we can concentrate on them later. And right now, but just a few words from Alexandra, please.
Lucas, thank you very much for giving me a word. I wanted to reply on some key moments I figure I need to. So first of all, your question was, what should EU change in order to accept Ukraine? The answer is the EU should also change the mindset. The problem right now is that EU sees Ukraine, and some EU producers see Ukraine as a competitor. But EU producers need to also keep in mind that EU is only 27 countries, while Ukraine has been exported to more than 170. So this is not always about margins. This is sometimes also the economy of scale. This should be taken in mind. That's one thing. The other thing is that Ukraine is already involved in some value chains that are taking place in the EU. So we are looking for cooperation rather than competition with the EU, and this needs to be put ahead of everything. Poland, even though there were some problems, and maybe there still is, with the Polish farmers and the excessive amount of Ukrainian cereals, again, as Oleg said, we need more figures and we need more information to put it down, because from our side, the situation is a bit different than the Polish producers show it. But at the same time, we didn't hear from the Polish side the information on how the export from Poland has increased, especially in terms of products with added value. And this was also built on the more cheaper Ukrainian products. We just don't hear this information from the EU or from the Polish, our neighbors or experts. We don't hear it, but this needs to be said. So instead of searching for the ways we are going to compete, why are we not searching for the ways we are going to cooperate? Because in cooperation, that would be way more benefits for both sides. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It will make me easy to go smoothly for the next question. What prospects do we see for the development of agriculture and food processing in Ukraine in the situation of access to EU? How Ukraine should adapt to European regulation in order to be equal partner in the community? Do you think, is Ukraine really ready, both financially, politically, and socially, to limit the production in some areas, like milk quotas, for example? In Poland, when we entered the European Union, it was a really big struggle for the milk quotas. And do you think Ukraine is open? Is it possible to open its market for entry the large foreign processing companies, with which it will be very difficult for Ukrainian entrepreneurs to compete? As well, in Poland, we had a really big problem with a big foreign, let's say the German or France processing companies, which were, it was simply impossible for Polish small companies to compete with them. I would like to start with Józef Lang, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Łukasz. Thank you for having me at today's discussions. Well, I would say that I mean definitely there are many opportunities for development of the agriculture and food sector in Ukraine in terms of accession to European Union. But here's something which we must keep in mind is that all the legislative regulations, which are obviously not easy to draft and not easy to implement, are very important. However, the political and social considerations, which you mentioned, are even harder, and their importance is larger. Also, as you mentioned at the beginning of the event, at the end of the day, the decision on Ukraine's accession into EU is a political one, and here not only legal factors such as implementation of EU legislation and Ukraine's meeting of all the requirements set by the EU are taken into consideration. But first of all, political factors and political considerations within the European Union member states play the most important role. And they should be remembered and considered in order to facilitate and accelerate the process. So, I mean, if we, as we probably all want to see Ukraine in EU as soon as possible, that is something which must be considered. Another aspect which also should be considered if we're talking about how Ukraine's agricultural sector can adopt in terms of accession to EU is that it's not also enough to let's say mechanically adopt the regulations. I mean, they also should be genuinely followed by regulators, government institutions, businesses, etc. And there also should be a perception that they are followed in such way, especially within the EU member states. And here in the past, prior to the full-scale Russian aggression, there were reports. I mean, in Poland and France and other major agricultural EU states of cases where such instruments as veterinary regulations, anti-dumping tariffs, or question of labeling of certain products, especially poultry products, which were exported to EU from Ukraine, were at times misused by Ukrainian companies, Ukrainian bodies, etc., which negatively affects both the business climate, perception of Ukraine, and perception of Ukraine as a country aspiring for EU membership. So, in terms of this political aspect, it's something which definitely should be kept in mind. And also, in this regard, it's better to adopt a more wholesome approach, where limitation in some areas, like for example milk quotas, also which you mentioned, are offset by opportunities in other. For example, the limitations which may be put in place in order to harmonize the markets can be offset by opportunities made available by EU funds for regional development, rural development, revitalization of rural areas, etc. And I think that this is the way also to move forward the issue of EU accession, and to maintain the not only the prosperity of Ukraine's agricultural sector, but in a wider approach, prosperity of Ukraine's rural areas. And this, I would say, last but not least, is especially true given the makeup of the Ukraine agriculture and food processing sector, which is largely dominated by large agricultural holdings, which sometimes are wouldn't want to use mask, but sometimes they encompass small and medium enterprises, which was obviously linked to the issue of lack of agricultural market in Ukraine until a few years ago. And such structure of the sector means that the interests of Ukrainian agricultural sector do not necessarily always align with those of the majority of the rural areas. So that's also something which should be kept in mind in the wholesome approach towards adaptation of EU regulations, and as well as development potential in case of Ukraine's accession into EU. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacek. And please, Veronica, the same question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you Joseph, for your vision. I tried to respond to some of the Lukasz questions, definitely not all. First, about the political and social considerations, definitely will be the EU political and social considerations, but I have to highlight that in Ukraine, it's a very broad social consensus about the EU accession and the understanding that all the reforms are highly needed. I guess we all understand that for Ukraine, the EU accession is not only the desire for better living standards or the larger markets, it's a security issue. Ukraine is at war. It was attacked, and everybody who in Kyiv feel that now very precisely, not being able to sleep for several nights because of the constant missile shelling. So we have to understand the mindset of that the driving force behind that. So the concessions, if they will be needed, they will be made. Second, about the legislative alignment. Yes, a lot remains to be done, but frankly, a lot has been done already. And I frankly think that, for example, food safety is one of the most difficult parts of in the whole agricultural thing, because you have to implement it at a micro level. And yes, definitely Ukraine still has to do a lot, but it's not, it takes years from the law to full hard implementation, but we are already in this process. And if you look at the scope of Ukrainian exports and the share of notifications and complaints compared to the scale of shipments, and if you look at this rapid alert RAS for EU system of notifications, you see that the scale of complaints compared to what Ukraine shipped is really tiny. So people, especially exporters that we can observe, they are really implementing that. Despite the things that sometimes something happens, and this system easily shows that it's not only Ukraine, it's always sometimes misused. As of the readiness for competition and for larger companies, I believe that colleagues will add, but frankly, Ukraine's market has been open, very open for many years, and Ukraine has a lot of huge, the leading global food producers already producing on the market. Actually, after 30 years of being quite, about 20 years, been quite an open country with very limited formal barriers and large market, I think everybody who had to die already in terms of business, they already that. So the businesses that are on the market, they are already ready for competition, just because they survived everything already. And rural development, availability of people, I agree that the people are the huge issue, but I still believe that a lot of Ukrainians are still in Ukraine that can implement the changes. And moreover, it's very important to link the rural development with the reconstruction, and understanding that agriculture and rural development in principle is a bit different things. That for efficient agriculture, you don't need everybody to work in that. The rural development probably has to be to the large extent decoupled from agricultural development, and thought as a also from environment, from quality of life, and very different perspectives. But here I stop and pass the floor to others.
Thank you. And Alexandra raised her hands also, please.
I cannot not reflect on some points that were discussed. So first of all, yeah, I want to say that capacity building in Ukraine is the problem. We've been facing it since 2014, I guess, since the actually war started and Russia has closed its border. So Ukrainian companies had to change quite fast their exporting markets, and they were growing this capacity building. But now Ukraine again is under attack since 2022. So the question of capacity building is back. That's one thing. The other thing is that definitely Ukrainian companies that are intended to export, they're already ready to compete. They're already implementing all the necessary requirements as of HASP, as of ICO, as of lots of other different standards and good manufacturing standards. All that is possible, all companies are trying to implement so that they would have the good position on the international market. That's the second question. The third question is about the big agricultural companies in Ukraine. UKAP and me personally, we are representing more than 130 big and medium agricultural producers in Ukraine. And it's quite interesting when I'm speaking about this in Europe, and I say that medium agricultural producers start from 5,000 hectares. European producers start to panic. Yeah, that's definitely true and completely logical reaction. But at the same time, I want to remind everyone here who is listening us that Ukrainian arable land is 30 plus million of hectares. This is unique for the whole Europe, because regularly in Europe we have regular size farmer, how much? 17 hectares. In Ukraine, it's 170 hectares. This is just an example. But EU producers need to understand that the structure of Ukrainian agricultural sector have been building for lots of years. And to be fair, we need to say that EU agricultural structure is also changing, because now producers are becoming bigger. They now have not just 70 hectares, they now have 170 hectares, which is start to grow. And this is the reality that EU needs to face. Is the EU ready for these structural changes? Because when we say that Ukraine has agricultural holdings, do we know already that EU also has agricultural holdings? They're not that big, but there are a few in the EU. So the process has started. We need to be fair on the same ground that Ukraine needs to have big companies in order to work on this massive amount of land. This is just structural. And at the same time, there was a remark regarding the sustainability and rural development and all this connected together. Quite recently, UKAP has conducted the research about the sustainable development of medium and big agricultural producers. And what we have found out that because big agricultural companies are listed on stock exchange international, also in Warsaw, in London, they also become credited by international financial institutions. That is how we implement sustainability and all the rural development standards way before medium and small producers do it. We also provide the platform for them to use this. So, I mean, if we speak about the agricultural scheme, definitely there's pros and cons, but EU agriculture also needs to be a bit updated.
Okay, thank you. But please remember, it's not only the question of area of production, but it's also the question of quality of production. So if the Ukrainian companies can meet all the European requirements, which are really, really tough. But unfortunately, the time is running out. So I have to go to the last question right
Lukasz,
now.
one last remark. The companies of Ukraine that are exporting to the EU, they are obliged to follow the EU standards. And if these companies are exporting, that means that these companies are already in line with the EU producers. That needs to be taken in mind.
Thank you. Thank you for this clarification. Well, Poland as well as Ukraine is a large food producer, with the fact that in Poland there is also a large food processing sector. So are we going to be the competitors, or the cooperation is possible? In which sectors of agriculture and agri-food processing can become areas of the best cooperation, and which sectors can complement each other's? Can Poland and Ukraine together create one of the largest food hubs in the world, Do you think is it possible? I will start with Marcin Nowacki, please. The competition or cooperation?
I mean, it's all up to us, and definitely the narrative that member states of the EU must understand something, or the agricultural sector of the EU must change, won't help. Won't help to open negotiations. Won't help to mitigate risks and different groups across member states. So we need to find a way. I want to answer Oleg that we were involved in the agri-food sector for many months. Actually, last year, we already had the roundtable meeting of agri-food stakeholders, including 2 ministries. We were involved in March and April, so it's not the case that we were not seen. We were seen as, if your minister comes and meets our companies, it means it was in March that we were involved. But again, it's not to discuss whether we should sacrifice micro and small businesses because of the situation. We need to find a way to make everyone willing to kind of enter this process and to find their own place and success doing business. Of course, there will be a competition. There is nothing wrong in the competition. We are a very pro-market organization in favor of the competition. Actually, we even created the Business for Ukraine Center. There are 5 staff members working only to support Ukrainian businesses to enter Poland and the single market. And I think we are one of the, if not the only, business organization in the region doing that, with a dedicated team working on supporting, matching businesses from Ukraine here in Poland and with other countries. But it can be done in a right, smart way, where we respect all the parties involved and all the stakeholders, or we can try to do it overnight. And then I think the result can be much different. Please remember that even Poland joining the EU in 2004 had transition periods for different services, had quotas, not just quotas. We had to limit some of the export to the EU. So there is definitely a way we can discuss. Once we name our interests and limitations, it's going to be easier to find the common ground and to find synergies to be a large European trader. I mean, the EU with Ukraine or the region, there's definitely a space to grow together to the third countries, but it requires investments. It requires long-term strategy that, yes, we want to, Poland, Ukraine, other countries in the region want to cooperate in order to sell goods to third countries. If that's the case, then we invest into storage facilities, we invest into terminals, we invest into seaports dedicated for grain, and so on and so forth. If the message and the reality is that most of the export goes only to member states, there will be, traps and difficulties. So what we propose now for those 5 member states neighboring with Ukraine to discuss quotas for those 4 categories of products that are right now banned to be imported. We can discuss quotas which are acceptable for local producers, for micro, small farmers, and will give the predictability to Ukraine, to Ukrainian traders and producers, what volume can be located in those 5 countries. And then we have still 22 countries of the EU that for now are fully open in terms of the import. So there are ways to discuss it. The same with processing. I mean, you're right, Poland is one of the largest processors of food in the EU, mostly for the EU, but Ukraine will go into that direction, and we have those companies on board at ZPP. So we discuss, I think that should be the first way of joint ventures, joint projects in Ukraine, on the Ukrainian soil, in terms of sectors from the Polish side, to invest in Ukraine with Ukrainians and to grow together. Again, with the perspective not just to produce for the single market, for the EU, it's limited, and the demographic, the demographics is negative, but to be exporter of the processed food, of ready products to third markets and globally. So it's all up to us. And I remember we had a roundtable on agri-food sector last July in Lviv, and exactly that kind of message was sent by participants from both sides. We can compete. It's gonna be a very tough competition if we just choose to enter and compete in the single market, and it's not gonna be sufficient for large Ukrainian producers. Anyway, of course, because it's not the volume we discussed. Or we can cooperate. In parts, we'll be competing anyway, which is good. That makes us better, and we keep our competitive advantage globally. But we can cooperate in processed food to third markets. Thank you.
Thank you. And a question from Roman. Which you think sectors of agriculture and agri-food processing can become areas of the best cooperation, and which sectors can complement each other between the Polish companies and Ukrainian companies?
My personal opinion is that when we look at the structure of Polish agriculture and Ukrainian agriculture, we have to think in different time frames. We have time frame which is now, and we can think about scenarios which will be in the future. The time frame which is now is slightly underdeveloped processing industry in Ukraine versus highly developed processing industry in Poland. And in this case, we can see that there is for sure some complementarity in low level or not too much processed products like grain and meat, but there is a high competition could be in the processed products. But in the future, what we can see is that Ukraine will probably develop in both ways. So we'll develop will invest in the processing, highly processed food, and will also maintain its export in raw products to some other parts of the world. So I believe that what has mentioned here, that Poland can benefit on cooperation in the accession, in the access to the European market by buying, for example, the intermediate products which may be necessary for exports to EU. The second element which was mentioned is the whole logistics which is needed for the agriculture to be exported and imported both ways. So which is ongoing, and I believe it will be still developed. In the same sense, we have to think about an export potential of Polish products to Ukraine, and this also can be distinguished in the different time frames. Both countries have very good knowledge of each other, and also the Ukrainian diaspora, which is very large in Poland, helps to learn about our products, and Polish are more and more aware of Ukrainian products. So I believe that despite there are some similarities, that the differences in the tastes and products within the same category range may help us to increase both exports and exports without any shame for both of the industries. And I would like also to raise then another element, which maybe it's too early for it, but it was mentioned by President Zelensky that there is some opportunity or the way of enabling Polish firms to invest in Ukraine. The history is not very good when we look in the past of Polish investments in Ukraine. So maybe in the future, thanks to this strong cooperation we have now, the willingness and opening and also the measures, the regulatory measure will be so convenient for Polish enterprises that they will be more willing to invest in Ukraine, because as you are all aware, investing in Western countries is highly difficult, highly risky, and highly capital consuming. So for Polish businesses, probably would be easier to take part in the Ukraine agriculture recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last minute for Oleg, please. Cooperate or compete?
No, cooperate. I mean, there is a huge space for cooperation, I think. So it's from the structural perspective, so if you look at the agri-food sectors in Ukraine and Poland, you immediately see cooperation. So crops, in our case, livestock processing, in Poland case, exchange of knowledge, know-how, and then investment. And also languages are also quite similar. I mean, not 100%, of course, but we understand each other quite good. So it's also additional benefit, I think, for our two countries. So that's I only see sort of benefits if politics doesn't mix up everything, you know. That's I think business is very kind of entrepreneurial in Poland and Ukraine. We always find the common ground, but if politics does not mix into this relationship.
So thank you. So we can summarize it. Let's two entrepreneurs do their job. Yeah. So thank you very much for the discussion. I would like to ask Veronika for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this rich debate, and I think it's just the beginning, because the concluding session showed that all of us for pro-cooperation. There is a huge opportunities, and I like the idea of agricultural hub, but that also means that we need to probably already jointly think what to do with the common agricultural policy of the EU, so that they accommodate for huge agricultural hub service in both EU and the global markets. So let's continue talking and hope that policy helps while politics do not intervene.
Thank you very much to all our audience, to all panelists. Thank you very much from the Warsaw Enterprise Institute and Institute of Economics Research and Policy Consulting from Kiev. Thank you very much, and we invite you for a coming discussion in other topics related to the accession of Ukraine to EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.